The rain hammered against the windows of Boston Logan International Airport with relentless fury, turning the tarmac into a mirror of dark gray clouds. Inside Terminal B, the first-class lounge buzzed with the quiet hum of privilege, leather chairs, soft jazz, and the clink of champagne glasses. Clara Duarte sat in the corner, her worn canvas backpack resting against her legs, her fingers wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she'd made herself at the employee station downstairs. She wore the burgundy polo shirt and black apron of Brewster's Coffee House, the small chain where she'd worked for the past 8 years. The fabric was faded from countless washes, the logo slightly cracked. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face, free of makeup except for a touch of chapstick, showed the kind of tired contentment that comes from a long shift well done. Clara didn't look like she belonged in the first-class lounge, and she knew it. But her boarding pass, clutched in her free hand, told a different story. Seat 2A, first class, on Flight 447 to Miami. A businessman in a tailored navy suit glanced at her from across the lounge, his eyes traveling from her scuffed sneakers to her coffee-stained apron. He leaned toward his companion, a woman dripping in pearls, and whispered something. They both smirked. Clara pretended not to notice. She'd learned long ago that people see what they want to see. A young woman in a service uniform couldn't possibly be anything more than what she appeared to be, and that was fine with her. She'd spent years being underestimated. It had become a kind of armor. Flight 447 to Miami now boarding all passengers. First class and priority members, please proceed to gate 18. Clara stood, slinging her backpack over one shoulder. She walked toward the gate with steady, unhurried steps, her sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floor. Behind her, she heard the businessman mutter to his companion, "Must be confused. Probably has a coach ticket and doesn't know how to read." The gate agent, a young man with kind eyes and a too-tight vest, scanned her boarding pass without a second glance. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Duarte. Enjoy your flight." "Thank you," Clara said quietly, and stepped onto the jet bridge. The aircraft was a Boeing 737-900, sleek and modern, with that new plane smell of leather and recycled air. Clara made her way down the narrow aisle, past the flight attendants who smiled politely, past the cockpit door that stood slightly ajar. She could see the pilots inside, running through their pre-flight checks, their voices low and professional. Seat 2A was a window seat positioned just behind the bulkhead. Clara settled in, tucking her backpack under the seat in front of her. She fastened her seatbelt and stared out at the rain-soaked runway, watching ground crew in bright yellow vests scurry around the plane like ants. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel it. The weight of everything that had brought her here. The accident, the hospital, the man who'd grabbed her hand and whispered, "You saved my life." The lawyers, the paperwork, the disbelief. And now this. A 22% stake in Skybridge Airlines, a seat on the board, a fortune she'd never asked for, and still didn't quite believe was real. But she still worked at Brewster's, she still made lattes for strangers. She still wore the uniform because it reminded her of who she'd been before everything changed, and who she still wanted to be. "Excuse me." Clara looked up. A man stood in the aisle, blocking the overhead light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Clara made in 3 months. His hair was silver at the temples, perfectly styled. His watch caught the light. A Rolex, probably a submariner. His expression was one of barely concealed irritation. "You're in my seat," he said flatly. Clara blinked. "I don't think so. This is 2A. She held up her boarding pass. The man didn't even glance at it. "There's been a mistake. I always sit in 2A. Always. I'm a Diamond Elite member." He said it like it was a title, like it meant something. "I'm sorry," Clara said, keeping her voice even. "But this is my assigned seat." His jaw tightened. "Look, sweetheart, I don't know how you ended up with a first-class ticket, but clearly there's been some kind of system error. Why don't you talk to the flight attendant and get this sorted out? I'm sure they can find you a nice seat in the back." The condescension in his voice was thick enough to choke on. Clara felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the feeling she got when someone decided, without knowing her, that she wasn't worth their respect. But she kept her face neutral. "This is my seat. You're welcome to check with the crew." The man's face flushed red. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "No," Clara said simply. "Should I?" A flight attendant appeared, her smile professional but strained. "Is everything all right here?" "This woman," the man said, gesturing at Clara like she was a piece of misplaced luggage, "is sitting in my seat. I need you to move her." The flight attendant checked both boarding passes, her eyes flicking between them. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hewitt, but Ms. Duarte is assigned to 2A. Your seat is 2C across the aisle." Richard Hewitt, Clara now knew his name, stared at the flight attendant like she'd just spoken in a foreign language. "That's impossible. I booked 2A specifically." "I understand, sir, but this is unacceptable." He turned back to Clara, his voice rising. "What are you even doing in first class? You're a waitress." He jabbed a finger at her apron. "You work in a coffee shop. You don't belong here." The cabin went silent. Other passengers craned their necks, watching. Clara felt every pair of eyes on her. She met Richard Hewitt's gaze without flinching. "I bought a ticket just like you." "With what? Your tip money?" He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Let me guess. You saved up for months just to sit up here once and pretend you're someone you're not. It's pathetic." Clara's hands clenched in her lap, but she said nothing. "Sir," the flight attendant said firmly, "I need you to take your assigned seat. We're about to close the cabin door." Richard Hewitt sneered at Clara one last time before stalking across the aisle to 2C. He threw himself into the seat with exaggerated frustration, making sure everyone knew he'd been inconvenienced. Clara turned back to the window, her heart pounding. She told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't owe him or anyone else an explanation. But the shame still burned. The flight attendant leaned down, her voice low. "I'm sorry about that. Some people—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" "I'm fine. Thank you." As the flight attendant moved away, Clara heard Richard Hewitt speaking loudly to the passenger beside him, a balding man in a pinstriped suit. "Can you believe they let just anyone into first class these days? I pay a fortune for this airline, and they seat me next to the help." The balding man chuckled nervously. Clara closed her eyes and took a slow breath. She thought about the letter in her backpack, the one from the airline's legal department, the one confirming her ownership stake. She thought about the meeting waiting for her in Miami, where the board of directors would formally welcome her as a part owner. She thought about how easy it would be to say something, to shut Richard Hewitt up, to watch his face crumble when he realized who she really was. But Clara had learned something important over the years. People like Richard Hewitt always revealed themselves. You didn't have to do anything, you just had to wait. The cabin door sealed with a heavy thunk. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hayes. Welcome aboard Skybridge Airlines Flight 447 with service to Miami. We'll be pushing back from the gate shortly. Flight time today is approximately 3 hours. We're expecting some light turbulence as we pass through this weather system, but nothing to worry about." Clara fastened her seatbelt a little tighter and stared out at the storm. She had no idea what was coming, but she was ready. The plane lurched forward as the tug pushed it away from the gate, and Clara felt the familiar flutter in her stomach, the same sensation she'd felt 1,000 times before, but one that never quite lost its edge. She pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching the ground crew disconnect their equipment and wave the aircraft forward into the taxiway. Richard Hewitt was still talking. His voice carried across the aisle with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told to shut up. "I'm telling you, Gerald, standards have completely fallen," he said to the balding man beside him. "Used to be, first class meant something. Now they're practically giving tickets away. Probably some diversity initiative or employee perk program." He laughed. "Next thing you know, they'll be seating janitors up here." Gerald shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Clara could see him in her peripheral vision, his face carefully neutral, clearly wishing he were sitting anywhere else. The plane turned onto the runway, engines building to a whine. Rain streaked across the window in diagonal lines, and the wing flexed slightly as wind buffeted the aircraft. Clara had flown enough to know this was normal. Boston weather in late October was notoriously unpredictable, but she could feel the tension in the cabin. First-time flyers always got nervous during takeoff in bad weather. "Ladies and gentlemen, flight attendants, please prepare for departure." The engines roared. The plane accelerated, pressing Clara back into her seat. Through the window, the world became a blur of gray and white, runway lights streaking past like tracer rounds. Then, with a gentle lift, they were airborne. The ground fell away. Boston disappeared beneath a thick blanket of clouds, and within seconds they were swallowed by the storm. The plane shook, bucking through pockets of turbulence. The seatbelt sign dinged, glowing amber above their heads. Across the aisle, Richard Hewitt gripped his armrest. For all his bravado, Clara noticed his knuckles had gone white. The shaking continued for another 5 minutes before they finally broke through the cloud layer into brilliant sunshine. The cabin brightened instantly, and Clara allowed herself to relax. Below them, the storm looked almost beautiful, a rolling sea of white and gray, soft and harmless from this height. The seatbelt sign chimed off. A flight attendant, her name tag read Jennifer, appeared with the beverage cart. She was in her mid-40s with kind eyes and the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this job for decades. "Something to drink?" she asked Clara warmly. "Just water, please." "Of course." Jennifer poured from a glass bottle, not the plastic ones they used in coach, and handed Clara the glass with a small napkin. "Anything else?" "We have snacks available, mixed nuts, pretzels, fruit and cheese plates." "I'm fine, thank you." Jennifer moved across the aisle. "Mr. Hewitt, can I get you something?" "Scotch." "Macallan 18 if you have it." "Neat." He didn't look at her when he spoke, his eyes fixed on his phone. "I'm sorry, sir, we have Johnny Walker Blue Label." Richard finally looked up, his expression sour. "Fine, whatever." Jennifer maintained her smile, but Clara saw the slight tightness around her eyes. She'd dealt with men like Richard Hewitt before, probably dealt with them every single flight. As Jennifer poured his drink, Richard suddenly pointed at Clara. "Tell me something. How does a coffee shop worker afford a first-class ticket? I'm genuinely curious." Jennifer's hand paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing. "Sir, I don't think—" "No, really." Richard pressed, his voice louder now, attracting attention from nearby passengers. "I'd love to know. Did Brewster's give you some kind of bonus? Employee of the month?" He smirked. "Or maybe you've got a sugar daddy paying for your trips." The cabin went quiet again. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade into the background. Clara set down her water glass carefully. She could feel everyone watching her, waiting to see how she'd respond. Part of her wanted to shrink into her seat, to avoid confrontation. That was the old Clara, the one who'd spent years apologizing for taking up space. But another part, the part that had dragged a bleeding man from a burning car 3 years ago, the part that had refused to leave his side until the paramedics arrived, that part was done being small. She turned to face Richard Hewitt directly. "I saved my money," she said evenly, "and I bought a ticket, just like you did." "Saved your money?" Richard laughed, shaking his head. "Right, on a barista's salary. What do you make, minimum wage plus tips? Must have taken you years." "It did," Clara said. It wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough. Before the inheritance, before everything changed, she had been saving. For what, she hadn't known. Just saving. Because that's what you did when you grew up with nothing. "Well, isn't that adorable?" Richard said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The little worker bee saved up her pennies to sit with the adults. Let me give you some advice, sweetheart. Next time, save yourself the trouble and fly coach. You'll be more comfortable with your own kind." Jennifer's face flushed. "Mr. Hewitt, I'm going to have to ask you to—" "My own kind," Clara interrupted, her voice still calm but edged with steel now. "What exactly does that mean?" Richard leaned back in his seat, spreading his arms expansively. "It means people who belong in first class, people who've earned it. I run 3 companies. I employ over 2,000 people. I generate wealth, create jobs, drive the economy. That's why I sit here." He gestured dismissively at Clara. "You pour coffee. There's a difference." The passenger in front of Richard, a woman with silver hair and expensive jewelry, turned around slightly, her face disapproving. But she said nothing. Clara felt the familiar heat rising in her chest, the anger she usually swallowed down. But this time, she let it fuel her words. "You're right. There is a difference. I serve people. I make their days a little better. I remember their orders, ask about their families, listen when they need someone to talk to. What do you do, Mr. Hewitt? Besides make the people around you feel small?" Richard's face went red. "How dare!" "That's enough." The voice came from behind them, deep, authoritative, and brooking no argument. A man stood in the aisle, tall and imposing in a pilot's uniform. His name tag identified him as Captain Michael Hayes. His face was weathered but handsome, with gray hair cropped close and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. Hewitt," Captain Hayes said, his voice measured but firm, "I'm going to need you to lower your voice and stop harassing other passengers. This is your only warning." Richard sputtered. "Harassing? I'm a Diamond Elite member. I have every right to—" "You have the right to sit quietly and follow FAA regulations," Captain Hayes cut him off, "which include respecting crew instructions and not creating a disturbance. Would you like me to have security meet us in Miami?" The threat hung in the air. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Finally, He slumped back into his seat, his jaw clenched. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. Captain Hayes nodded once, satisfied. Then he turned to Clara and his expression softened. "Ms. Duarte, I apologize for the disruption. Are you all right?" Clara blinked, surprised that he knew her name. "I'm fine. Thank you, Captain." "Good." He smiled, a genuine warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Enjoy your flight." As he walked back toward the cockpit, Jennifer leaned down to Clara. "Can I get you anything else, perhaps something stronger than water?" Clara managed a small smile. "I'm okay, really." But as Jennifer moved on with her cart, Clara's mind was racing. The captain had known her name. He'd intervened personally, something she suspected didn't happen often. She wondered if he knew, if someone had told him, if the crew had been briefed. Across the aisle, Richard Hewitt sat in furious silence, nursing his scotch and staring daggers at the seat in front of him. The rest of the first-class cabin had returned to their conversations, their magazines, their laptops. But Clara could still feel the residual tension, the sideways glances. She pulled out her phone and opened her email, scrolling through messages she'd been ignoring. There was one from Martin Sinclair, Skybridge Airlines CEO, confirming their meeting tomorrow morning. Another from the legal team, with attached documents she needed to review. A third from her manager at Brewster's, asking if she'd decided about the promotion to district supervisor. Clara stared at that last one for a long time. A month ago, district supervisor had seemed like a dream job. More responsibility, better pay, a chance to make decisions. Now it felt impossibly small, like a life that belonged to someone else. Everything had changed so fast. Too fast. 3 years ago, she'd been driving home from a double shift, exhausted and half asleep when she'd seen the car swerve off Route 1. She'd watched it flip twice before slamming into a concrete barrier and bursting into flames. Most people would have called 911 and kept driving. Clara had pulled over. She'd run toward the burning wreck without thinking, without hesitation. The driver's door was jammed. She'd grabbed a tire iron from her trunk and smashed the window, cutting her hands on the glass. The man inside had been unconscious, bleeding from a head wound, smoke filling his lungs. Clara had dragged him out, had pulled him 50 feet away just before the gas tank exploded. She'd saved Harold Redmond's life, and Harold Redmond, as it turned out, was the founder and majority shareholder of Skybridge Airlines. The lawsuit from his family had been vicious. They'd contested the will, called Clara a gold digger, accused her of manipulating a sick old man. But Harold had been crystal clear in his final instructions. The woman who'd saved him would receive 22% of his airline shares and a seat on the board. "She gave me my life back," Harold had written. "The least I can do is give her a future." Clara hadn't wanted it, hadn't asked for it, didn't even fully understand what it meant. But Harold's lawyers had been insistent. "You're a multimillionaire now, Ms. Duarte, whether you like it or not." The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, jolting Clara from her thoughts. Her water glass rattled against the tray table. Outside, the sky had darkened, not with storm clouds, but with the deepening blue of late afternoon. They were making good time. Jennifer's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our in-flight meal service shortly. Today's first-class menu features a choice of pan-seared salmon with roasted vegetables or herb-crusted chicken breast with wild rice. We'll be coming through the cabin momentarily." Clara wasn't hungry, but she accepted the meal when it came. The salmon, which was surprisingly good for airplane food. She ate slowly, mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Richard Hewitt had gone quiet, but she could feel his resentment radiating across the aisle like heat. He'd been humiliated, called out by the captain in front of everyone. Men like him didn't forget that. As the meal service concluded and trays were collected, the intercom crackled again. But this time it wasn't Jennifer's voice. It was Captain Hayes. "Good afternoon again, folks. We're currently cruising at 37,000 feet with clear skies ahead. We should be landing in Miami right on schedule. But before we continue, I have a special announcement to make." Clara's stomach dropped. She had a sudden, terrible premonition of what was coming. "We have someone very special flying with us today," Captain Hayes continued, his voice warm with genuine respect. "A true hero and also a valued member of the Skybridge Airlines family." No, Clara thought. Please don't. 3 years ago, this remarkable woman pulled a man from a burning vehicle, saving his life at great personal risk. That man was Harold Redmond, the founder of this airline. As a result of her extraordinary courage and selflessness, Mr. Redmond, before his passing, chose to honor her in his will. The cabin had gone completely silent. Clara could hear her own heartbeat. "It is my great privilege," Captain Hayes said, "to welcome aboard Ms. Clara Duarte, who now owns 22% of Skybridge Airlines and serves on our board of directors. Ms. Duarte, on behalf of the entire crew and everyone at Skybridge, thank you for flying with us. This aircraft and this company are honored to have you." The silence that followed was absolute. Clara sat frozen, her face burning, as every head in first class turned to stare at her. And across the aisle, Richard Hewitt's face had gone completely, utterly white. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Clara could hear everything. The hum of the engines, the whisper of recycled air through the vents, the faint rustle of someone shifting in their seat. But no one spoke. No one moved. Richard Hewitt looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His face had drained of all color, his mouth hanging slightly open, his expensive scotch forgotten in his hand. His eyes were fixed on Clara with an expression somewhere between horror and disbelief. Around them, the other passengers began to react. The woman with silver hair in front of Richard turned completely around, her eyes wide with recognition. The businessman who'd smirked at Clara in the lounge stared down at his lap, his ears red. Gerald, sitting next to Richard, had pressed himself against the window as if trying to physically distance himself from the situation. Jennifer approached Clara's seat, her professional smile now genuine and warm. "Ms. Duarte, is there anything at all we can get for you? Anything you need?" Clara's throat felt tight. She managed to shake her head. "No, thank you. I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Her hands were trembling in her lap, her heart racing. She'd specifically asked Martin Sinclair not to make a big deal about her presence on flights. She'd wanted to remain anonymous, to travel quietly without attention or special treatment. But Captain Hayes clearly hadn't gotten that memo, or had chosen to ignore it. The intercom crackled one more time. "We'll be dimming the cabin lights for those who wish to rest. Thank you again and enjoy the remainder of your flight." As the lights lowered, creating a softer, more intimate atmosphere, Clara felt, rather than saw, Richard Hewitt stand. She kept her eyes fixed on the window, watching clouds drift past, but she could sense him in the aisle beside her. "Ms. Duarte." His voice was barely above a whisper, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. May I speak with you for a moment?" Clara slowly turned to face him. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. "What would you like to say, Mr. Hewitt?" Her voice was quiet but steady. He opened his mouth, closed it. "Tried again. I need to apologize. What I said to you, how I treated you, it was completely unacceptable. I was rude, condescending, and frankly cruel. I'm deeply sorry." Clara studied him. The apology sounded rehearsed, almost mechanical. But underneath it, she could see genuine fear. Not remorse for his behavior, fear of consequences. "You're apologizing because of what the captain announced," Clara said. "Not because of what you did." Richard flinched. That's not entirely fair." "Isn't it?" Clara kept her voice level. "If I were actually just a waitress, if I were exactly who you thought I was, would you be standing here apologizing? Or would you have spent this entire flight feeling justified in putting me in my place?" He couldn't meet her eyes. That was answer enough. Clara sighed. "Mr. Hewitt, I'm not interested in punishing you or making you grovel, but I want you to understand something." She leaned forward slightly. "Every single person you meet has a story you know nothing about. The waitress serving your coffee might be working 3 jobs to put herself through medical school. The janitor cleaning your office might be a veteran who served our country. The person sitting next to you on a plane might own the airline." Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "You judged me based on my uniform," Clara continued. "Based on assumptions about my worth, my value, my right to occupy the same space as you. And the only reason you feel bad now is because I turned out to be someone you consider important." She shook her head. "That's not how respect works. That's not how human decency works. You're right." Richard's voice was hoarse. "You're absolutely right. I've allowed success to make me arrogant, to make me forget that everyone deserves basic dignity." He paused. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. Genuinely. Not just because of who you are, but because of how I made you feel." Clara wanted to believe him. Part of her, the part that still remembered being the person everyone overlooked, wanted to accept his apology and move on. But another part, harder and wiser, knew that people like Richard Hewitt rarely changed. They might feel momentary shame, might recognize their cruelty when it was pointed out, but the fundamental belief in their own superiority ran too deep. "I accept your apology," she said finally. But I hope you'll remember this the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on appearances." Richard nodded again, more vigorously this time. "I will. I promise." He hesitated. "Would it be appropriate to? Could I buy you a drink?" As a gesture of, "That won't be necessary," Clara interrupted gently. "Just treat people better. That's all I ask." He backed away, returning to his seat with the defeated posture of a man who'd been thoroughly humbled. As he sat down, Clara heard him murmur something to Gerald, who responded with an uncomfortable grunt. Jennifer appeared again, crouching beside Clara's seat. "I just want to say," she whispered, "what you told him was perfect. I've been doing this job for 23 years and I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with passengers like him. They think service workers are invisible, disposable." She smiled. It felt good to see someone finally call it out. "You deal with this often?" Clara asked. Jennifer's smile turned sad. "More than you'd think. The higher up the cabin class, the worse it gets sometimes. Not everyone, of course. Plenty of first-class passengers are lovely. But there's a certain type who sees us as props rather than people." She glanced back at Richard. "That type usually doesn't learn, but maybe this one will." After Jennifer moved away, Clara tried to settle into her seat, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind was racing, replaying the confrontation, the captain's announcement, Richard's hollow apology. She thought about the meeting tomorrow in Miami, her first official board meeting. She'd be walking into a room full of executives who'd spent their entire careers in aviation, and she'd be sitting at the table as an equal, as an owner. The thought terrified her. Clara pulled out her phone and opened the documents Martin Sinclair had sent. Financial reports, operational statistics, strategic plans for expansion. The numbers blurred together. She understood basic business. You didn't work retail for 8 years without learning about profit margins and inventory management. But this was different. This was millions of dollars, thousands of employees, complex regulations and market forces. What was she doing? What had Harold been thinking? Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Diana Chen, her best friend since high school and the only person who knew the full story of what had happened. "How's the flight? Any drama?" Clara almost laughed. She typed back, "You have no idea. Call you when I land." 3 dots appeared. Then, "That sounds ominous. Everything okay?" "I'll survive, just a long day. You got this, Clara. Remember, you earned this. Harold saw something in you that went way beyond saving his life. Trust that." Clara stared at the message. Diana always knew exactly what to say. She typed back a heart emoji and put her phone away. Outside the window, the landscape had changed. The solid blanket of clouds had broken apart, revealing glimpses of the world below. Clara could see the coastline now, the distinctive shape of Florida's eastern shore, the Atlantic Ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon. They were getting close. She closed her eyes and let herself remember that night. The smell of burning rubber and gasoline, the heat of the flames on her face, Harold's weight as she dragged him across the pavement, her hands slick with blood, his and hers mixed together, the way he'd looked at her in the hospital 3 days later, tubes running from his arms, his face bruised and swollen. "Why did you do it?" he'd asked, his voice weak. "You could have died." Clara hadn't known how to answer. "Someone needed help," she'd said finally. "I couldn't just drive away." Harold had smiled, a small, painful smile. Most people would have. Most people do. They'd talked for hours that day. Harold had told her about building Skybridge from nothing, about his late wife, about his children who'd become strangers chasing their inheritance. He'd asked about Clara's life, and she'd found herself telling him things she rarely shared, about growing up in foster care, about working her way through community college, about dreams she'd set aside because survival took precedence. "You remind me of myself," Harold had said, "before I forgot what mattered." A month later, he'd had a massive stroke. 2 months after that, he was gone, and Clara's life had changed forever. The intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Miami. We should be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." Clara straightened in her seat and fastened her seatbelt. Through the window, she could see Miami taking shape below, the sprawl of the city, the glittering high-rises, the port with its massive cruise ships. Somewhere down there was the hotel where she'd be staying, the conference room where tomorrow's meeting would take place. A new chapter of her life. Jennifer came through the cabin one final time, collecting trash and checking seatbelts. When she reached Clara, she paused. "Ms. Duarte, I just want to say, it's an honor to have you on board. What you did for Mr. Redmond. He was a good man. He treated us well, always remembered our names, asked about our families. The company changed when he got sick, but maybe, she smiled hopefully, maybe with you on the board some of that spirit will come back. I'll do my best, Clara said softly, but I'm still figuring out what that means. You'll figure it out, Jennifer said with confidence. Anyone who'd risk her life for a stranger? You've got what matters most. As Jennifer moved on, Clara looked across the aisle one last time. Richard Hewitt was staring out his window, his face unreadable. She wondered what he was thinking, whether any of this would stick, or if he'd wake up tomorrow and convince himself he'd been the victim of some elaborate misunderstanding. The plane banked into its final approach, and Clara's stomach lifted with the change in altitude. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thunk and a mechanical whir. Below them, the runway lights were already visible, stretching into the distance like a string of pearls. Clara pressed her hand against the window, feeling the vibration of the engines, the slight bounce as they hit pockets of air. Her reflection stared back at her, a young woman in a coffee shop uniform, ordinary and unremarkable, except she wasn't. Not anymore. The wheels touched down with barely a bump and the engines roared in reverse thrust. They were taxiing now, past other aircraft, past ground crews and service vehicles toward their gate. The plane slowed, turned, slowed again. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Miami International Airport. Local time is 5:47 p.m., and the temperature is a beautiful 78 degrees. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. Clara waited. Around her, passengers were already standing, reaching for overhead compartments, eager to deplane. Richard Hewitt remained seated, his hands folded in his lap, not looking at anyone. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Clara stood, reaching for her backpack. As she stepped into the aisle, Captain Hayes emerged from the cockpit. He was smiling, extending his hand. Ms. Duarte, it was a pleasure having you on board. Clara shook his hand. Thank you, Captain. Though I wish you hadn't made that announcement. His smile didn't falter. Orders from the top, I'm afraid. Mr. Sinclair wanted the crew to know who you are. Wanted to make sure you were treated with appropriate respect. He lowered his voice. Between you and me, I think he also wanted to make a point to certain passengers about assumptions and humility. Clara glanced back at Richard Hewitt, who was studiously avoiding eye contact. Mission accomplished, she said dryly. Captain Hayes chuckled. Have a good evening, Ms. Duarte, and welcome to the family. Clara walked off the plane, through the jet bridge, into the bustle of the terminal. Her phone buzzed immediately. Messages from Martin Sinclair's assistant confirming her hotel, her car service, the meeting time tomorrow. She ignored them for now, just walking, letting the moment settle. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She turned. Richard Hewitt stood there looking lost and small despite his expensive suit. Ms. Duarte, thank you for not having me thrown off the plane, for hearing me out. Clara nodded once. Treat people better, Mr. Hewitt. That's all any of us can do. She walked away, leaving him standing alone in the terminal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out how to be the person Harold thought she could be. But tonight, Clara Duarte was just going to be herself. And maybe finally that was enough. The Miami sunrise filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Clara's hotel room, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. She stood on the balcony of the Mandarin Oriental, 23 floors above Biscayne Bay, watching boats cut white trails through the turquoise water. The air was thick and warm, carrying the salt tang of the ocean mixed with the faint aroma of jasmine from the gardens below. Clara had barely slept. She'd spent most of the night reviewing documents, trying to absorb 3 years' worth of financial reports and operational data in a few hours. Her eyes felt gritty, her head heavy, but adrenaline kept her alert. In 2 hours, she'd be walking into Skybridge Airlines corporate headquarters. In 2 hours, everything would become real. Her phone rang. Diana's face filled the screen, a photo from last summer, both of them laughing at some forgotten joke, ice cream cones melting in their hands. Please tell me you're not panicking, Diana said without preamble. Clara laughed despite herself. I'm absolutely panicking. Good, that means you care. Diana's voice was warm, reassuring. Now tell me about yesterday. Your text sounded cryptic. Clara recounted the flight, Richard Hewitt's condescension, Captain Hayes's announcement, the awful silence that had followed. Diana listened without interrupting, though Clara could hear her sharp intake of breath at certain moments. What an absolute asshole, Diana said when Clara finished. Please tell me you got him banned from the airline. I didn't do anything to him. Clara, come on, he publicly humiliated you. And then he apologized. Sort of. Clara leaned against the balcony railing. Besides, what would be the point? Revenge doesn't change anything. It might make you feel better, maybe, but it would also prove him right, that I only matter because of who I am now, not because I deserve basic respect as a human being. Clara shook her head. I don't want to be that person. I don't want power to turn me into another version of him. Diana was quiet for a moment. You know what? This is exactly why Harold chose you. You could have that man destroyed with a phone call, and instead you're worried about staying true to yourself. That's not weakness, Clara. That's strength. It doesn't feel like strength. It feels like I'm letting him get away with it. You're not. He has to live with the knowledge that he insulted and belittled someone who could end his career. And she chose mercy. That's going to eat at him way more than any punishment you could impose. Diana paused. Now, are you ready for this meeting? Clara looked back into her hotel room where her clothes were laid out on the bed. She'd agonized over what to wear. The burgundy Brewster's polo felt too casual, but the one business suit she owned, bought at a discount store 5 years ago for a job interview, seemed like she was trying too hard. In the end, she'd compromised. Dark jeans, a cream-colored blouse, and a navy blazer. Professional but not pretentious. Herself but elevated. I guess I have to be ready, Clara said. You've got this. Call me after, okay? I want every detail. They said goodbye, and Clara went inside to get dressed. Her hands shook slightly as she buttoned her blouse. She thought about Harold, wondered what he would say if he could see her now. Would he be proud? Or would he regret his decision, seeing how unprepared she was for this world? You're stronger than you think, he'd told her once near the end. You just haven't had reason to know it yet. Clara stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was both familiar and strange. Same dark eyes, same straight nose, same unruly hair she'd finally learned to tame into professional waves. But there was something different in her expression now. Something harder, more determined. She could do this. She had to do this. At exactly 8:30 a.m., a black car pulled up to the hotel entrance. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a precise manner, held the door open. Ms. Duarte? I'm Robert. I'll be taking you to Skybridge headquarters. The drive took 20 minutes through Miami's downtown, past Art Deco buildings and palm-lined streets, until they reached a gleaming glass tower in Coral Gables. The Skybridge logo, a stylized bridge connecting two clouds, was etched into the granite facade. Clara's stomach clenched as Robert opened her door. Good luck, Ms. Duarte, he said quietly. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with a massive digital display showing real-time flight information from around the world. Behind the security desk, a young woman in a crisp uniform looked up as Clara approached. Clara Duarte for the board meeting, Clara said, hating how uncertain her voice sounded. The woman's eyes widened slightly. Of course, Ms. Duarte, Mr. Sinclair is expecting you. 23rd floor executive conference room, you'll need this. She handed Clara a visitor badge with her name already printed on it, along with the words board member underneath. Clara clipped it to her blazer and headed for the elevators. Her reflection multiplied infinitely in the mirrored walls. Dozens of Claras all looking equally nervous. The elevator rose smoothly, efficiently, the numbers climbing. 15th floor, 18th, 21st. The doors opened onto a hushed corridor with thick carpet and abstract art on the walls. A woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal pantsuit, stood waiting. Her hair was silver, cut in a sharp bob, and her eyes were shrewd but not unkind. Ms. Duarte, I'm Patricia Vance, Mr. Sinclair's executive assistant. Welcome to Skybridge. She extended her hand, her grip firm and professional. The board is gathering now. May I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Water would be great, thank you. Patricia led her down the corridor to a set of double doors. Through the glass panels, Clara could see a large conference table surrounded by leather chairs. Several people were already seated, talking in low voices. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A few things before we go in, Patricia said quietly. The board consists of 9 members, including yourself. Martin Sinclair is chairman and CEO. You'll also meet Victoria Chen, our CFO, James Whitmore, representing our largest institutional investor, and several others. Most of them are traditional, corporate types who've been in aviation their entire careers. And they're thrilled about Harold's decision, I'm sure, Clara said dryly. Patricia's lips twitched. They're reserving judgment. Some are genuinely curious to see what fresh perspective you might bring. Others, she shrugged diplomatically. Let's just say they're waiting to see if you'll fold under pressure or prove Harold right. No pressure then. You saved a man's life without hesitation, Ms. Duarte. A boardroom full of executives should be nothing by comparison. Patricia smiled. Ready? No, Clara thought, but she nodded anyway. Patricia pushed open the doors. The conversation stopped immediately. Every head turned toward Clara. She forced herself to walk confidently into the room, to meet their eyes rather than staring at the floor. Patricia handed her a bottle of water and gestured to an empty chair near the head of the table. Everyone, Patricia said, may I present Clara Duarte? A man at the head of the table stood. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of face that had been handsome in youth and aged into distinguished. His suit was perfectly tailored, his tie a subdued burgundy. This had to be Martin Sinclair. Ms. Duarte, welcome. His voice was deep, warm, genuinely pleased. He came around the table to shake her hand. I'm Martin Sinclair. We've emailed, but it's wonderful to finally meet you in person. Harold spoke very highly of you. Thank you for having me, Clara managed. Martin gestured around the table. Let me introduce everyone. To my left is Victoria Chen, our chief financial officer. Victoria was a woman in her 40s with sharp features and intelligent eyes behind designer glasses. She nodded at Clara, her expression neutral, but assessing. James Whitmore, representing Continental Capital Partners, our primary institutional investor. James was younger than Clara expected, maybe early 50s with sandy hair and the calculating look of someone who thought in numbers and percentages. His handshake was brief, perfunctory. Martin continued around the table introducing the others. Robert Davenport, head of operations, Michelle Torres, general counsel, David Park, head of strategic development, and two others whose names Clara immediately forgot in her nervousness. Please, sit. Martin returned to his chair and Clara took her seat, hyper-aware of everyone watching her. The leather chair was too big, too formal. She felt like a child playing dress-up in adult furniture. Martin opened a leather portfolio. Before we begin the formal meeting, I wanted to take a moment to address the elephant in the room. He looked directly at Clara. Ms. Duarte's presence on this board is unprecedented. She has no background in aviation, no MBA, no corporate experience. Some of you have expressed concerns about this. Clara's face burned. She could feel the weight of their judgment. However, Martin continued, his voice firm, Harold Redmond built this airline from nothing. He made it profitable when everyone said it was impossible. He treated employees with dignity, customers with respect, and investors with honesty. And in his final years, when illness had stripped away everything except what mattered most, he chose Ms. Duarte to carry forward his vision. Martin's eyes swept the table. I intend to honor that choice. I expect all of you to do the same. Silence. Then Victoria Chen spoke, her voice crisp and professional. With all due respect, Martin, sentiment doesn't run an airline. We're facing increased competition from budget carriers, rising fuel costs, and a pilot shortage. We need strategic expertise, not goodwill ambassadors. I agree, James Whitmore added. Continental has significant capital invested in Skybridge. Our shareholders expect competent governance, no offense to Ms. Duarte, but what exactly does she bring to this table? Clara felt her throat tighten. This was it, the moment where she either proved herself or confirmed their worst assumptions. She thought about staying quiet, letting Martin defend her. That would be easier, safer. But Harold hadn't saved her a seat at this table so she could be silent. You're right, Clara said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. Everyone turned to look at her. I don't have an MBA. I don't know the difference between yield management and load factors. I've never negotiated a union contract or analyzed a merger proposal. Victoria and James exchanged glances. But I know something you don't, Clara continued. I know what it's like to be invisible. I've spent 8 years serving customers who look right through me. I've cleaned up messes, dealt with complaints, worked double shifts because someone called in sick. I've been yelled at, disrespected, and treated like I don't matter. She leaned forward. And yesterday on one of your flights, I watched a passenger humiliate me in front of an entire cabin because I was wearing a service uniform. He assumed I didn't belong in first class, that I wasn't good enough. The room was dead silent. Harold knew something that you're all in danger of forgetting, Clara said quietly. Airlines don't run on spreadsheets and strategic plans, they run on people. Pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, mechanics, cleaners. Thousands of people who show up every day and do jobs that most passengers never think about. And if you treat those people like they're disposable, like they're just line items on a budget, you will lose what makes this airline special. Victoria's expression had changed. no longer quite so dismissive. So no, Clara finished. I can't read a balance sheet as well as Ms. Chen. I can't analyze market trends like Mr. Whitmore, but I can tell you what your frontline employees are experiencing. I can be the voice in this room for the people who make Skybridge actually work. And if you don't think that's valuable, she shrugged, then maybe Harold was wrong about all of you, not just me. The silence stretched. Then Martin Sinclair began to clap, slowly at first, then with genuine enthusiasm. Well said, Ms. Duarte. Well said indeed. Robert Davenport, the operations chief, was nodding. She's not wrong. We've had 3 wildcat strikes in the past 2 years because employees feel unheard. Maybe we need someone at this table who actually understands their perspective. Understanding is fine, James Whitmore said, his tone grudging but thoughtful. But she'll need to learn the business side too. Fast. I will, Clara said. I'm a quick study, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Victoria Chen tapped her pen against her portfolio, studying Clara with new interest. All right, I'm willing to see how this plays out, but I'll be watching closely, Ms. Duarte. Sentiment only goes so far in business. Fair enough, Clara replied. Martin smiled. Then let's get to work. We have a full agenda today. He opened his laptop and the screen behind him illuminated with a presentation. First item, our Q3 financial results. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Clara's head swam with information, revenue projections, cost analyses, fleet modernization plans, labor negotiations. She took notes furiously, asked questions when she didn't understand something, and tried to absorb as much as possible. When they finally broke for lunch, Patricia appeared with sandwiches and salads. The board members scattered, some making phone calls, others checking emails. Martin approached Clara's chair. You did well, he said quietly. That speech about frontline employees, that resonated. Robert's already talking about setting up focus groups with staff. I just told the truth, Clara said. The truth is often the most powerful thing in rooms like this. Martin sat down beside her. Harold saw something in you, Clara. Something beyond gratitude for saving his life. He saw someone who hadn't been corrupted by power or money. Someone who still remembered what it meant to struggle. He smiled sadly. That's rare in our world. Don't lose it. Clara looked around the conference room at the expensive furniture, the view of Miami stretching to the horizon, the tablets and laptops worth more than she used to make in a month. I'll try, she said. But this is overwhelming. It's supposed to be. You're not just learning a job, Clara, you're learning how to use power responsibly. That's the hardest thing anyone can do. As the afternoon session began, Clara felt something shift inside her. She still didn't know everything. She was still out of her depth. But maybe, just maybe, Harold had been right. Maybe she did belong here after all. 3 weeks had passed since Clara's first board meeting, and she'd barely had time to breathe. Her life had become a whirlwind of conference calls, financial reports, and late-night study sessions trying to understand the complexities of airline economics. She'd flown back to Boston, packed up her tiny apartment, and said a tearful goodbye to her colleagues at Brewster's. Though she'd promised her manager she'd still cover shifts when she could. Some parts of herself she wasn't ready to leave behind. Now standing in the employee break room at Miami International Airport's Terminal 3, Clara felt more at home than she had in any boardroom. The space was cramped and fluorescent lit, with mismatched chairs, an ancient microwave, and a bulletin board covered in union notices and birthday cards. It smelled like burnt coffee and the industrial cleaner used on the floors. This was Martin Sinclair's idea. If you're going to represent employees, he'd said, you need to understand what they actually face every day. Shadow different positions. Talk to people, learn the operation from the ground up. So Clara had spent the past week working alongside gate agents, observing maintenance crews, riding in cockpit jump seats, and today, her final rotation, she was shadowing the cabin crew on Flight 2847 to Chicago. Her supervisor was Jennifer Holmes, the same flight attendant who'd defended her against Richard Hewitt 3 weeks ago. Ready for this? Jennifer asked, handing Clara a regulation-issue uniform vest. Fair warning. Friday afternoon flights to Chicago are always chaotic. Business travelers, families, college kids heading home for the weekend, and everyone's in a hurry. Clara pulled on the vest, adjusting the name tag Jennifer had made for her. Clara, training. I've worked retail for 8 years. I can handle chaos. Jennifer laughed. We'll see. Come on. Aircraft's boarding in 20 minutes. They made their way through the terminal, past crowds of travelers dragging luggage and staring at departure boards. Jennifer moved with practiced efficiency, greeting other crew members, checking her phone for last-minute gate changes. Clara struggled to keep up, trying to absorb everything. The aircraft was a 737-800, configured for 175 passengers. Jennifer led Clara through the pre-flight inspection, checking emergency equipment, counting life vests, testing the oxygen system. Clara watched how Jennifer's hands moved with automatic precision, muscle memory from thousands of flights. "Passengers start boarding in 5, Jennifer said, glancing at her watch. "First class first, then our premium economy, then main cabin by zone. Your job is simple. Greet people, help with bags, answer questions, and smile no matter what they say to you. Even if they're rude, especially if they're rude." Jennifer's smile was wry. "Remember, you're representing the airline. Your feelings don't matter. Their experience does." Clara thought about Richard Hewitt, about every condescending customer she'd served at Brewster's, about biting her tongue and swallowing her dignity because that's what the job required. Right. Customer service. The first passengers began trickling in, the usual first-class crowd of business suits and expensive luggage. Clara stood near the galley, observing how Jennifer greeted each person by name, checking their boarding passes, offering to hang coats and store bags. Her demeanor never wavered. Warm, professional, attentive. Then the main cabin started boarding, and the trickle became a flood. A woman with 3 small children struggled down the aisle, bags falling off her shoulders, the youngest child crying. Clara jumped forward instinctively. "Can I help with those?" The woman looked at her with exhausted gratitude. "Please, we're in 23C, D, and E." Clara helped stow the bags, buckled the youngest child into his seat, and retrieved a coloring book that had fallen on the floor. The woman gripped her hand. "Thank you. You have no idea how much that helps." "I have some idea," Clara said, thinking of all the single mothers she'd seen at Brewster's juggling kids and coffee and work stress. "You're doing great." As Clara returned to her position, Jennifer gave her an approving nod. The boarding continued. Most passengers were fine, polite, efficient, grateful for help. But then came the difficult ones. A man in his 40s, wearing a polo shirt and cargo shorts, stopped at row 14. He stared at his boarding pass, then at the seat, then back at the boarding pass. "This is wrong," he announced loudly. "I paid for extra legroom." Clara checked his ticket. "Sir, you're in row 14. That's our standard economy section. Extra legroom seats are rows 16 and 17, marked on your boarding pass as—" "I know what I paid for," he snapped. "Someone screwed up my reservation. Fix it." Jennifer appeared smoothly at Clara's side. "Sir, I'd be happy to look into this. May I see your confirmation email?" He pulled out his phone, jabbing at the screen with irritation, then shoved it at Jennifer. Clara watched as Jennifer's eyes scanned the information. "I see the issue, sir. You selected extra legroom but didn't complete the purchase. It shows here as pending, not confirmed. That's not my problem. That's your website's problem." "I understand your frustration," Jennifer said, her voice perfectly calm. "Unfortunately, our extra legroom seats are fully booked for this flight. But I'd be happy to note this in your customer profile and have our service team follow up with a credit toward your next flight." The man's face reddened. "I'm not interested in credits. I want what I paid for." "Sir, you didn't actually pay for it. The transaction wasn't completed. Are you calling me a liar?" Clara felt her own frustration rising. The man was clearly wrong, clearly unreasonable, but Jennifer never lost her composure. She just kept smiling, kept offering solutions, kept de-escalating. Eventually, the man stormed to his seat, muttering about filing complaints and switching airlines. Jennifer turned to Clara, her smile never wavering, though Clara could see the tension around her eyes. "That happen often?" Clara asked quietly. "At least once per flight," Jennifer replied. "Sometimes more." They finally closed the cabin door and began the safety demonstration. Clara stood in the aisle, going through the motions Jennifer had taught her, demonstrating seatbelts, oxygen masks, flotation devices. Most passengers ignored her completely, absorbed in phones and magazines. A few watched politely. One teenage boy filmed her on his phone, probably for some social media joke. Clara felt invisible again, just like at Brewster's, just like everywhere she'd ever worked. The plane pushed back from the gate, taxied to the runway, and took off smoothly. As they climbed through 10,000 feet, the seatbelt sign chimed off, and Jennifer stood. "Okay, now the real work begins. Beverage service for 175 people. You take the left side, I'll take the right. Remember, smile, Be efficient and don't let them see you sweat. Clara grabbed the beverage cart and started down the aisle. The first few rows were easy. Coffee, water, orange juice. But then came the complications. Do you have tomato juice? Is this diet or regular? I asked for no ice. Can I get a whole can instead of just a cup? I'm allergic to peanuts. Are there peanuts in those pretzels? My daughter wants apple juice, but not too cold. Can you warm it up? Each request required attention, precision, a smile. Clara's feet began to ache. Her back hurt from bending over the cart. Her face felt frozen in its pleasant expression. And then, around row 28, she met him. He was probably in his early 30s, wearing an expensive watch and designer headphones. When Clara stopped his cart at his row, he didn't look up from his laptop. Something to drink, sir? Nothing. He kept typing. Sir, would you like something to drink? He held up one finger, the universal gesture for wait, and continued working. Clara stood there, cart blocking the aisle, passengers behind her getting impatient. After 30 seconds, he finally looked up, pulling off one headphone with exaggerated annoyance. What? Would you like something to drink? No. He replaced the headphone and returned to his laptop. Clara moved on. But 2 rows later, the call button dinged. She looked back. It was him, the man who'd said no. She made her way back. Yes, sir? I'll have a gin and tonic. Clara kept her smile fixed. Of course. Just one moment. She prepared the drink. Bombay Sapphire over ice, tonic water, lime wedge. Exactly as Jennifer had taught her. She placed it on his tray table carefully. That'll be $8, sir. He didn't reach for his wallet. It should be free. I'm sorry, sir, but alcoholic beverages in economy are $8. I fly this airline all the time. They've always been free. We've had paid alcoholic beverages in economy for 3 years, sir. He stared at her like she'd insulted him. This is ridiculous. Fine. He pulled out a credit card and thrust it at her. Clara ran the card through the portable reader. It declined. Sir, your card was declined. Do you have another form of payment? His face flushed. That's impossible. Run it again. She did. Same result. Your machine is broken, he said flatly. Sir, I assure you the machine is working. Would you like to try a different card? I don't have another card, and I'm not paying cash for an $8 drink that should be free anyway. He picked up the gin and tonic and took a long sip. There, already drank it. What are you going to do now? Clara felt something snap inside her. This entitled attitude, this assumption that rules didn't apply to him, this casual theft justified by perceived unfairness. It was everything she'd been dealing with her entire working life, but she kept smiling. Sir, if you consume the beverage without payment, I'll need to note it in the flight report and you may receive a bill from our customer service department. Go ahead, I'll dispute it. He dismissed her with a wave and replaced his headphone. Clara returned to the galley, her hands shaking. Jennifer was already there, restocking cups. She took one look at Clara's face and understood. Let me guess. Row 28? The guy who declined to pay? You saw? I've been doing this long enough to spot trouble from 3 rows away. Jennifer smiled sympathetically. Welcome to the glamorous world of airline service. Some days you get thanked. Most days you get treated like furniture. And some days you get people who think $8 is worth stealing over. How do you deal with it? Jennifer was quiet for a moment, refilling ice. Honestly, I remind myself why I took this job. I love flying. I love traveling. I love meeting people from all over the world and helping them get where they need to go. The difficult passengers, they're just noise, background static. I don't let them define my experience or make me bitter. She looked at Clara. But it's not easy. And if you're going to be on the board, you need to understand what we deal with. Because this, she gestured at the cabin, this is reality, not boardrooms and quarterly reports. This is where your decisions actually matter. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of more beverage service, trash collection, and 100 small requests. Clara's feet screamed with pain. Her smile felt like a mask made of concrete. When they finally landed in Chicago and the passengers deplaned, she collapsed into a jump seat. You survived, Jennifer said, sitting beside her. How do you feel? Exhausted, invisible, like I just ran a marathon while being yelled at. Clara laughed tiredly. Exactly like I remember. And you did this for 8 years at a coffee shop? Every single day. Jennifer shook her head in admiration. Then you're tougher than half the executives I've met. They couldn't last one shift doing what we do. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to deplane, Clara's phone buzzed. A text from Martin Sinclair. How's the shadowing going? Learning anything useful? Clara typed back, "Learning that we don't pay our frontline staff nearly enough. We need to talk about compensation and working conditions." 3 dots appeared, then, "Bring it to the next board meeting. I'm listening." Clara smiled. A real smile this time, not the professional mask she'd worn all day. Maybe Harold had been right. Maybe she could make a difference here. Not because she understood corporate strategy or financial engineering, but because she understood what it meant to be the person everyone overlooked. The person who kept everything running while being treated like they didn't matter. Jennifer stood, stretching. "Come on. There's a crew lounge upstairs with decent coffee and comfortable chairs. You've earned both." As they walked through the terminal together, Clara noticed something. Other flight attendants nodded at Jennifer with recognition and respect. Gate agents smiled. Even pilots acknowledged her as they passed. Jennifer Holmes wasn't just doing a job. She was part of a community, a network of professionals who understood each other's struggles. And now, somehow, Clara was part of that community too. In the crew lounge, surrounded by tired flight attendants swapping stories and decompressing from their shifts, Clara finally understood what Harold had seen in her. Not potential for greatness or business acumen, just someone who knew what it meant to serve others with dignity, even when that dignity wasn't returned. Someone who would remember, no matter how high she climbed, what it felt like to be invisible. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Diana. "So, how's the corporate world treating you?" Clara looked around the lounge. At the worn furniture, the vending machines, the exhausted faces of people who'd spent their day making other people's journeys possible, and typed, "I think I'm finally figuring out where I belong." And for the first time in 3 weeks, she actually believed it. 6 months had passed since Clara Duarte's life had changed forever on that rainy October day in Boston. Now, standing in the executive conference room on the 23rd floor of Skybridge headquarters, she barely recognized the woman she'd been. The nervous, uncertain person who'd first walked through these doors had been replaced by someone more confident, more assured, though still learning, still growing. The Miami skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Atlantic Ocean glittering in the afternoon sun. Clara stood at the head of the conference table, a presentation clicker in her hand, facing the same board members who'd questioned her worth 6 months ago. But today was different. Today, she wasn't here to prove herself. She was here to change things. "Thank you all for coming," Clara began, her voice steady. The screen behind her illuminated with her presentation title, "The Human Factor, a Proposal for Frontline Employee Investment." I know we've covered a lot of ground today. Q4 projections, the Denver hub expansion, the new aircraft orders. But I want to talk about something that doesn't show up on balance sheets but impacts every single one of those initiatives. Victoria Chen looked up from her tablet, interested. James Whitmore leaned back in his chair, arms crossed but attentive. Martin Sinclair gave Clara an encouraging nod. "6 months ago I sat in one of your first-class seats and was humiliated by a passenger who assumed I didn't belong there because of what I was wearing," Clara said. "Some of you know this story. What you don't know is that it wasn't an isolated incident. It was Tuesday. Just another Tuesday in the life of a service worker." She clicked to the next slide, showing photographs. Flight attendants serving drinks, gate agents helping passengers, mechanics working on engines, cleaning crews between flights. All of them were real Skybridge employees she'd met during her rotations. "These are the people who make this airline run," Clara continued. "Not us in this room, them. And for the past 6 months, I've worked alongside them. I've served drinks at 35,000 feet. I've helped passengers find their gates. I've watched mechanics work 12-hour shifts in the Florida heat. And I've learned something crucial. We are failing them." Robert Davenport, the operations chief, shifted in his seat. "That's a strong statement, Clara. It's an accurate one." Clara clicked to the next slide, showing compensation data. "Our frontline employees are paid 18% below industry average. Our flight attendants start at $28,000 a year. Poverty wages in most cities where we operate, gate agents make barely more. And we wonder why turnover is at 34%, why customer service scores are declining, why we're facing union actions. We're competitive with other legacy carriers," Victoria interjected, "and our profit margins are already thin. Labor costs are our second largest expense after fuel." "I know," Clara said. "I've read every financial report. I understand the economics. But I also understand something you can't quantify on a spreadsheet, what it costs to be constantly undervalued." She clicked again. This slide showed employee survey results she'd commissioned. Thousands of responses from frontline staff across the company. The numbers were damning. 67% felt underappreciated. 54% were actively looking for other jobs. 73% said management didn't understand their challenges. "I've spent 6 months talking to our employees," Clara said. "Really talking to them. Not PR-approved focus groups or sanitized town halls. Real conversations in crew lounges and break rooms and parking lots. And they all say the same thing. They love this job. They love flying. They love helping people. But they're exhausted. They're burned out. They're one bad shift away from quitting." The room was silent. Clara could see the board members processing, calculating, resisting. Change was expensive. Change was risky. "Let me tell you about Jennifer Holmes," Clara said, clicking to a photo of Jennifer in uniform, smiling despite obvious fatigue. 23 years with Skybridge. Perfect safety record. Consistently top marks in customer service. She's been assaulted by passengers twice. Once someone threw hot coffee at her because we ran out of their preferred snack. She's worked through the flu because she couldn't afford to miss a shift. She makes $52,000 a year after 2 decades of service. Clara's voice intensified. "Jennifer represents thousands of employees who've given their lives to this company, and we're telling them through our compensation and policies that they don't matter, that they're expendable, that anyone could do what they do." "So, what's your proposal?" James Whitmore asked, his tone skeptical but not dismissive. "We can't just give everyone raises without impacting shareholder value." "I'm not asking you to," Clara said. She clicked to her final slide, a comprehensive proposal she'd spent months developing with help from labor consultants and employee representatives. "I'm proposing a 3-year investment plan that addresses compensation, benefits, and working conditions. Year 1, 8% across-the-board raises for all frontline staff, bringing us to industry standard. Improved health benefits with lower deductibles. Guaranteed schedule stability, no more last-minute shift changes." Victoria was already shaking her head. "That's at least $120 million annually. Where's that money coming from?" "Several sources," Clara replied calmly. "First, we reduce executive compensation packages by 15%, including mine." She looked around the table. "If we're asking frontline staff to sacrifice, leadership should too. Second, we optimize our route network. I've identified 12 underperforming routes that lose money every quarter. We reallocate those resources. Third, we implement the operational efficiencies Robert's team has been proposing for 2 years, but haven't had budget for. Combined, these measures offset about 60% of the cost. And the other 40%, Martin asked, "Comes from reduced turnover and improved customer satisfaction," Clara said. "Right now, we spend $87 million per year recruiting and training replacement staff. High turnover also impacts service quality, which drives customers to competitors. If we retain employees and they're happier, service improves, customer loyalty increases, revenue grows. The investment pays for itself within 18 months according to 3 independent analyses I commissioned." She placed printed copies of those analyses on the table. Victoria immediately grabbed one, her eyes scanning the numbers. James Whitmore took another, his expression thoughtful. "Year 2, Clara continued, "we establish an employee profit-sharing program. When the company does well, the people who made it happen share in that success. Year 3, we create clear career advancement paths. Right now, a flight attendant has almost no way to move up without leaving the cabin crew entirely. We change that. We create senior positions with better pay. We invest in training and development." Michelle Torres, the general counsel, spoke up. "What about the unions? Have you discussed this with them?" "Extensively," Clara said. "They're cautiously optimistic. They've been fighting for these changes for years. Having it proposed by management, by someone who's actually done their jobs, carries weight." Robert Davenport nodded slowly. "I have to say, this is the most comprehensive employee retention proposal I've seen in 30 years in this industry. The question is whether we have the courage to implement it." "The question," James Whitmore corrected, "is whether it's financially viable." But he was still reading the analysis, and Clara could see his skepticism wavering. Martin Sinclair stood, walking to the windows. He stared out at the ocean for a long moment before turning back. Harold Redmond founded this airline on a simple principle: treat people well and they'll take care of the business. Somewhere along the way we forgot that. We started thinking of employees as costs to minimize rather than assets to invest in. He looked at Clara. "You're reminding us of what we lost, of what made Skybridge special in the first place." "I'm trying," Clara said quietly. "The financial analysis is solid," Victoria admitted, still reading. Aggressive, but solid. If we hit the retention and satisfaction targets, the ROI is actually impressive. She looked up. I'm willing to support this. Conditionally. We piloted in 2 hub cities first, Miami and Chicago. We measure results quarterly. If the metrics don't improve within 12 months, we reassess. I can work with that, Clara said, relief flooding through her. I have concerns about the executive compensation cuts, James Whitmore said. Our shareholders expect competitive leadership packages. Our shareholders should expect ethical leadership, Clara countered. Leadership that doesn't profit while the workforce struggles. I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is, literally. James studied her for a long moment. Then surprisingly he smiled. You know what? So am I. I've made enough money in my career. If cutting my compensation means better morale and stronger long-term performance, I'm in. One by one, the other board members voiced their support. Some enthusiastically, others reluctantly. But by the time the vote was called, it was unanimous. Clara's proposal passed. As the meeting adjourned, Martin approached her. That was masterful. You've learned fast. I had good teachers, Clara said, and strong motivation. Harold would be proud. Martin's eyes were distant. He always said the airline industry had lost its soul, that we'd become so focused on quarterly earnings that we forgot we were in the business of people, not just transportation. He focused on Clara again. You're bringing that soul back. After everyone left, Clara stood alone in the conference room, looking out at Miami. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jennifer Holmes, who'd become not just a colleague but a genuine friend. Heard rumors about the board meeting. Good news? Clara smiled and typed back, the best. Talk soon. Her mind drifted back to that flight 6 months ago, to Richard Hewitt's sneering face, to the humiliation she'd felt, the shame of being judged by her uniform rather than her worth. At the time, it had felt like just another painful reminder of her place in the world, invisible, insignificant, easily dismissed. But that moment had also crystallized something inside her, a determination to use whatever power she'd unexpectedly gained, not for revenge or personal glory, but to make things better for people like her, people who worked hard, showed up every day, and deserved respect regardless of their job title or paycheck. Her phone rang. Diana's face appeared on the screen. Tell me everything, Diana demanded the moment Clara answered. Clara laughed and recounted the meeting, Diana's excited responses punctuating the story. When Clara finished, Diana was quiet for a moment. You know what's amazing? Diana finally said. 6 months ago you were terrified of that boardroom, terrified of being exposed as a fraud who didn't belong, and now you just convinced a table full of corporate executives to invest over $100 million based on your proposal, your vision. It's not my vision, Clara protested. It's just common sense. Treat people well and good things happen. That's exactly the point. To you it's common sense because you've lived it. To them it's a radical new strategy that required extensive analysis to justify. That's why you belong in that room, Clara. Not despite your background, but because of it. After they hung up, Clara gathered her materials and headed for the elevator. As the doors opened, she nearly collided with someone stepping out. A young woman in her early 20s wearing a Skybridge cleaning uniform, pushing a cart of supplies. Sorry, the woman said quickly, stepping back. No, my fault, Clara replied. She noticed the woman's name tag. Rosa. You're heading up to clean the executive floor? Rosa nodded, looking nervous. Yes, ma'am. Is that? Am I allowed up here right now? Of course, this is your workplace too. Clara held the elevator door. I'm Clara, by the way. I know who you are, Ms. Duarte. Rosa's eyes widened. Everyone knows. You're the lady who saved Mr. Redmond, who owns part of the company now. Clara smiled. I'm also the lady who used to scrub coffee stains out of carpet at 6 a.m. and dealt with customers who treated me like furniture. Not that different from what you do. Rosa's expression shifted. Surprise, then recognition, then something like hope. Really? Really? How long have you worked here? 8 months. I'm saving money for nursing school. This job has good benefits and the overnight shift pays a little extra. She hesitated. It's hard sometimes, though. People don't see you when you're cleaning. They walk right past like you're invisible. I know exactly what you mean, Clara said softly. But you're not invisible, Rosa. Your work matters. You matter. And things are about to get better around here. I promise. Rosa's eyes glistened. Thank you, Ms. Duarte. As Clara stepped into the elevator and the doors closed, she saw her reflection in the polished metal. A woman in business casual clothing, carrying a leather portfolio, looking every bit the executive she'd somehow become. But underneath that surface, she was still the person who understood Rosa's invisible struggle, who remembered what it meant to be overlooked. And that, Clara realized, was her real power. Not the share she owned or the boardroom seat she occupied, but the bridge she could build between the executive floor and the break rooms, between quarterly reports and daily realities, between profit margins and human dignity. The elevator descended, and Clara thought about where she'd go from here. There was so much more to do, implementing the new programs, measuring their impact, probably fighting more battles with people who didn't understand why treating employees well mattered. But she was ready. Not because she'd mastered corporate strategy or become someone different, because she'd learned that being herself with all her coffee shop experience and working-class perspective was exactly what Skybridge needed. Her phone buzzed one more time, an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "An apology, 6 months late." Clara opened it. "Ms. Duarte, you don't know me, but I know you. My name is Richard Hewitt. 6 months ago, I was the passenger on Flight 447 who treated you with inexcusable disrespect. I've thought about that day constantly since then, about my behavior, about my assumptions, about the kind of person I'd become. I won't insult you by making excuses. I was wrong, completely, utterly wrong. And your grace in the face of my cruelty has haunted me. I've spent these months trying to be better. I've volunteered at a food bank. I've made a point of learning the names of service workers I encounter. I've tried to see people rather than positions. It's harder than it should be, which tells me how far I'd fallen. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that you changed something in me that day. Not through revenge or punishment, but through dignity, through being exactly who you are. Thank you for that lesson. I'm still learning it. Respectfully, Richard Hewitt." Clara read the email twice, then looked out at Miami's skyline as her car pulled away from Skybridge headquarters. The city glowed in the late afternoon light, full of people living their own invisible struggles, fighting their own battles for recognition and respect. She thought about responding to Richard's email. Maybe she would, eventually. But for now, she simply saved it. A reminder that change was possible, that people could grow, that one moment of choosing dignity over anger could ripple outward in ways you'd never see. 6 months ago, Clara Duarte had boarded a plane wearing a coffee shop uniform, expecting nothing more than a flight to Miami. She'd been humiliated, diminished, reduced to a stereotype by someone who couldn't see past her appearance. And now she was here, not just surviving, but thriving, not just occupying space, but transforming it, using her unexpected power to lift up the people she'd left behind, the ones still wearing uniforms and being overlooked. Harold Redmond had given her more than shares in an airline. He'd given her a platform, a voice, a chance to prove that the people everyone overlooks might be exactly the ones who see most clearly. Clara smiled as her car merged into traffic, heading toward the modest apartment she'd rented near the airport, close to the people she now represented, close to the work that mattered. She'd spent her whole life being invisible. Now, finally, she was learning what it meant to be seen, and more importantly, what it meant to see others. The journey was just beginning.